Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Well-Rounded Fool, Exploration of Atrocity. This is episode 4, and we are really getting through this. Before we get started, I just want to thank everyone who has been watching these lectures. I've been kind of clipping up and posting clips from these on my other social channels on Instagram and especially Twitter, YouTube Shorts. They've been performing extremely well. So I just want to, before we get into today, I just want to thank everyone who has been watching this, who's part of this journey. And before we start, I want to make it clear I'm just a thinker. These are topics I'm very passionate about. I don't profess to be a professor or a professional or anyone who is legit. Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to me or you should or whatever. That's not my right to decide what you do. But these are just topics that I'm very passionate about. And in no way am I professional. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm not saying that you're wrong for thinking the way you think. I'm merely just sharing my thoughts on the internet. So before we start, I just wanted to get that off my chest. But I thank everyone who has been supporting this, and I hope you guys stay with this as we discover and as we just look underneath the surface. That's what this whole entire thing is about. Just looking underneath of the surface to strengthen our beliefs, not to destroy them. So anyway, this is episode 4, and today is titled Descartes, Rationality in Propositional Tyranny. That is a term from John Vervaeke, a professor I had a great conversation with. I'll leave a little thing up here. We had a great conversation a few months ago. So what are we talking about today? Well, let's first talk about what we talked about in the last episode, which was about Hume and Kant. So perception and the deception and the necessity for truth. Was that the last one? Or David Hume and the is-ought dilemma. Sorry, my bad. I forgetting the titles of my own episodes here. So in the last episode, we talked about Hume, Kant, their kind of contributions, their thoughts to how we think today, the is-ought dilemma. So, and we contrast both of their beliefs. So Hume was on the side. Hume was first. He was on the side of. Sorry, he wasn't first. He was second. Hume was on the side of the rationality. He was a strict empiricist. What he saw, what he could observe, what he could calculate is therefore that is what exists. So there's what he had a problem, but overall he was fundamentally right, because although he was wrong about his empirical analysis of the world, he was right that you cannot draw strictly from your senses what you ought to do, the moral actions from the mere sense data. So he was right about that. Kant came along and he's seen the mistakes that Hume was doing, influenced by Hume, and he said, not only is there is a interpretation from the senses. So Hume was right about the interpretation from senses. He said, our senses, if we see something, if we experience it, then that therefore will have a causal reaction. He was right about that. But then Kant seen that, and he dug deeper. And if Hume would have think about it more, he would have came to the same realization. Also, if he hadn't have thrown away his religious presuppositions. But anyway, Kant said not only is there an interpretation, but there is actually an a priori moral interpretation of our senses. So what is guiding my perception, what is guiding my senses, what is guiding my wanting to use these senses in a specific way is an a priori moral interpretation. And how he illustrated that out, and how Mr. Whitman demonstrated that out in his paper when he was contrasting both of their views, is our abstract knowledge, is what logic is. Logic is universal. Logic is an abstract a priori knowledge that we have. We have the ability to understand that things make sense before we have our senses. And this is what Hume and other empiricists have completely wrong, is that we are not subject to our senses. We're not subject to mere sense data. And not only that, Kant then came later and said, not only are we just not subject to our sense data, actually there is really no such thing as a raw sense data. You are not that reality voyeur, how Jack Derrida thought. You're not that person who can take himself outside of reality, look at it and say, this is what's really going on. Kant said you can never come to the thing in and of itself. And the reason why I'm holding a marker is because we're going to transfer to the whiteboard later when we talk about Descartes and epistemology. I can't talk today. Epistemology, when we talk about that. So what is today? Today is Descartes, rationality, and propositional tyranny. Bear with me. So what are we talking about today? So we already covered, our problem with perception, our problems with our sense data. There is an a priori interpretive framework that's going on, that's guiding our senses. We're not just cold, calculated human beings that see something and then react. Although that is a deep part of our more biological or more id functions in a Freudian sense, or more id. So the id would be the sexual desires, the hungers. If I would hear something, I would have if I was in danger, if I would hear a loud noise, we would stop. We would have that amygdala reaction. We would stop. If I had a really strong hunger, if I was in a primal situation, I would literally delete everything else out and only think about that. In our most primal and our most biological functioning way, we do have that one-to-one causal reactions, but that's not the driving factors of human beings in and of themselves. And the people who try to make it seem like we are just one-to-one mapping human beings, they remove that person's sovereignty, and they remove free will altogether. Because if you just say that people are just one-to-one mapping, like in a rigid biological, psychological way, someone like Skinner, who would say that people are products of their environment, so people are products, and then we're just slaves to our sense data. It's completely and utterly wrong. It is seriously wrong, and I can prove that with a meme. There was a popular meme that I seen on the internet one day, and it blew me back. Like, it literally blew me back. And it's not even that really amazing. It's not even funny. I don't even think it's appropriate to call it a meme. It's more like a deep cartoon. I guess you could call it a meme. It's more like a deep moving cartoon. It's like a story. It's a one-page story. I was already skeptical of people like Skinner and people who think that we're just causation creatures, when that's so wrong. So this picture, what is it? So this shows two guys, stick figures or whatever. There's variations of it, but the one I seen, it was a drawing, and it was a guy. He walked up to this other guy and he said, why are you an alcoholic? And he said, oh, because my dad was an alcoholic. And this guy was really like, he had like messy hair, and he was like smudges all over his face, looked like someone you would try to avoid at all costs. So he said, why are you an alcoholic? My dad was one. And that makes a whole lot of sense. And you can understand that, because if you were in that environment, if you were in that ecosystem of people who are subject to drugs, who are subject to these certain behaviors, that has to a certain extent that has an effect on you. And people are and they're right about that. Psychologists are right about that in a certain kind of way. But what they don't understand is that there is a difference between putting people, and especially testing people on rats, testing human being functions on rats. And even though there is a tight relation, you can get an approximate presupposition from testing on animals. For instance, we test things on animals for humans all the time. There is a tight connection there. But the thing is, when we're talking about and even moral ways. We're talking about like something as deep as somebody's it's not just behavior. It's not just a causal reaction like how an animal would. And I'm not even like a super expert on, like animal research studies or biology. I'm not even like a huge expert on that. But if you look at this from a philosophical standpoint, we're not just talking about behavior. We're talking about something deeper than that. We're talking about something deeper than science, something deeper than you can calculate in a petri dish. We're talking about something deeper. These are moral presuppositions, how Kant was talking about. These are a priori moral interpretations that we're discussing. They're not just behavior. To take behavior in a box and say this is behavior, so I do this, I say this, I act this certain way, and treat it as a thing in and of itself is wrong. It's a wrong approach. When it's something that is deeper, that's driving that behavior. We had the presuppositions first. I don't think it's right to just section off behavior in its own thing in and of itself. We have the presuppositions first. That's what Kant's point was. We have these moral presuppositions first. Why am I going to do that? Because it's a moral obligation. Why am I going to look at this thing? Why am I going to value this more than I'll value this other object I'm staring at? This is the relevance realization that John Beveke talks about. What is guiding my perceptions? What is guiding me to care about certain things? There's something deeper, more than just mere behavior. So this guy, he said, why are you an alcoholic? My dad was one. That's a damn good explanation. Like, I was in that environment. That's all I knew. This is all I was. I was heavily influenced by that. And so he's not wrong for that. He's not wrong to have an event like that impact him. But the word, when people use that word, well, because, it's like, well, are we just products of the environment? Like, it's why were you? Well, because my dad was one. It's a reasonable answer, but it's not the answer. It's not the answer. There's something deeper going on. So I went from that picture and then jumped to the next one. And it was a really successful human being. I know it sounds corny, but this is real. It went to a successful human being. He had a nice, he looked presentable, not like the guy who was all, beat up and looked like he just got jumped by like 3 MMA fighters. He was successful. He had nice hair. He had a nice car. He had a successful life. And the same guy walked up to him. He said, how'd you get all that stuff? How did you obtain that success? How did you beat your primal instincts? How did you not just obsess over, video games and eating Cheetos all day long? How did you get to this specific point in life? He looked at him, he said, because my dad was an alcoholic. You have the free will, and this is what scientists don't understand. You have that free will to choose. You have that free will to choose. And you can't replicate that in an experiment because you're missing the point. You're missing the point. Doesn't come down to data. It doesn't come down to analytics. That point, that meta point that you have the choice, that is the answer, because that is where everything else is derived from. It doesn't start with the abstracted behavior. It doesn't start there. It starts with the moral presuppositions of me being in that environment, of me seeing how this substance affects my father or my mother or my aunt or my uncle or whoever. It starts off with that. It starts off with that moral presupposition for me to even value what that other person does. For me to even value that I value what I see other people do. There's too many variables to construct behaviorism down to mere causation. We have free will to choose. And this is what that meme was. It was great. It really just stuck with me. And I always think about that. It's like, My dad was an alcoholic. My dad was an alcoholic. It's the same answer. It's a different behavioral pattern. So I just wanted to share that because it just kind of just blows up that rigid scientific way of thinking. And the reason why this whole entire lecture series is called Well-Rounded Fool is because the well-rounded fool believes in a certain way that people are just infinitely malleable in that certain sense, that people are just products of their environment. If I can just say this a certain way, if I can just do this a certain way, then I know that therefore he will have this reaction, or I know therefore I will get this outcome. It's acting in that Machiavellian instrumental way. And they, in the well-rounded fool, belittles people's intrinsic understanding of having that free will. The well-rounded fool belittles the concept of free will. He belittles that spark of divinity, that someone could be in a have a different outcome. The well-rounded fool has to belittle that I mean it's like the basis of what we're doing. It's the basis of what we're talking about. It's the basis of science. It's the basis of philosophy. It's the basis of psychology. It's the basis of neuroscience. It's the basis of everything. Those are moral, deeper presuppositions. You have the choice. You are not subject to your surroundings. We know this. We've known this for thousands of years. But the reason why we're talking about epistemology today is because it's important that we know not just with our perceptions, but how we are acquiring information. And this is what Carl Jung was, and this is why I always say I think he was the first he was the first cognitive scientist to exist, because this is what I believe. Maybe he didn't know this, but I think he had that same question: how do people acquire information? Because this is how he described introverts and extroverts in his book Psychological Types. This is how he developed those two modes of an introvert or an extrovert, someone who is attaching themselves to an object, or someone who is looking at the object and abstracting away and saying, how can I get this same thing doing it this way? These are not social, being open or shy, calm, or being flamboyant. Those are not behavioral or social characteristics. These are cognition. This is perception. So this is why I think he was the first cognitive scientist to exist. But why are we talking about epistemology? Because your ability to acquire knowledge, the study of acquiring knowledge, is a very strange thing. Because what knowledge are we choosing to acquire? What am I using to know? How do I know that I know something? What does it even mean to know something? To be honest, what does it even mean to know something? And I think many people stumble across this. I think some people conflate knowing with belief. And maybe there is no difference between knowing and belief. But I think there's significance of dissecting and understanding what epistemology is because if we don't have a clear understanding of how we are acquiring information, and I think that leaves people wide open for the possibility of deception, for the possibility of abusing that process itself. And all these, when we talk about postmodernism, when we talk about psychology, when we go back to verses from the New Testament or the Old Testament, this is all about what area can you sneak in something deceiving, something that is purposely trying to deceive you. There's always going to be that little snake, that little parasite in the garden. It's like in the Garden of Eden. There was in the most possible, beautiful, most harmonious place you could ever be, there was something there that was bad. And that's the same thing in every single, this is the significance of that. Even in the damn Garden of Eden, there was something bad. So what makes you think that I mean, that just wipes out a utopia. That wipes out the utopian vision. The Old Testament just wipes out the utopian vision. The Garden of Eden, that one story completely wipes out the utopian socialistic mindset that we can come to this certain point, that we can completely do away with evil, that we can just wash all of our sins away and live this happy, extravagant life when we all can share the same resources. It completely wipes that out because there's always something there lurking. You can almost say the instance, I mean, only the devil can make a possibility where there can be nothing but upside. That's manic. A manic thinks everything is good. That's literally by definition the state of a manic. Everything is great. How are you doing? I'm doing great. What did you do? I don't know. I'm damn sure proud of it. It's all upside. There's nothing bad. Well, ask yourself, which state would you want to be in? A state where you are in just nothing is bad. We have no hierarchical structure of what should be at the top, what should be at the bottom. How Carl Jung and Eric Neumann were describing consciousness. Well, if we have this structure in being up here is no better than being down here, or being over there is no less or worse than being over here, what are we supposed to do? There's literally nowhere to go. That is why, if you're in a structure that the concept of discernment is completely wiped out. You by definition have nowhere to go, which is why they have to reinsert that political ideology to give them crutches, to give them a wheelchair, to give them wheels. Because you're just stuck in this place. Well, why would I go over here if there's no better than over here? Why would I go up here if I'm going to be the same place down here? Being in a environment where there is nothing but upside is the definition of something that is fundamentally corrupt, because there is no discernment taking place. There's no discernment. If there's no discernment, then there is no upside. It's a complete perversion of the idea of coming to a place where it can get better. But ask yourself, do you want to be in a place where it fundamentally doesn't change, or you want to be in a place that's kind of okay, but we're on the path to getting better? Which one do you want? And we actually kind of know this. We actually kind of know this neurologically. When we do something, when we posit a goal, it's not obtaining that goal that we get that dopaminergic or that serotonin satiation from. That's not where we're getting that serotonin from. We are getting the confirmation. We are getting the motivation when we see ourselves progressing towards a goal. That is where we're getting the serotonin satiation from, not from actually attaining the goal. And you'll see this, and this is really common in postpartum depression, when women will have the baby, and for that whole 9 months, going through the whole process, sonograms, getting the baby shower, talking to here, going to here, and then boom, you have it, and then what? Boom, you just immediately go down. Why? Because it was the process of thinking about the child. What we're going to name it, what we're going to do, where is she going to go to school, how many friends is she going to have, how many birthday parties we're going to do, what are we going to do, what college are you going to, where should you have a good boyfriend, should you have a bad one, all this. It is the process, it is the hope, it is the knowing that that everything is not right, but I can get towards something. That is where you're getting that meaning. That's where the meaning is. Not in some pre-made, predestined, fake utopian vision of nothing but upside. Why would you want that? Why would you want to be in a place where you literally can't see the future? There is no future. Viktor Frankl talked about this. This is a Nazi tactic, putting people in situations in the camps when they were telling the Jews in the camps, when they would make them work. The Soviets did the same exact thing. He would tell them to work. Solzhenitsyn said the same exact thing. They would tell them to work, but they wouldn't tell them when they were going to be done. They would put them in lock them in jail. Alexander Dogan wrote a really great book. He was the American Hero. He was someone who was really, really, really overlooked. Alexander Dogan is one of the most, I would say, the most underrated story in American history ever. This man was this was during after the Soviet collapse. He was kidnapped in Soviet Russia. He was shipped off to the I'm gonna forget this name. Subulanka. It's a Russian. It was one of the most leading Russian gulags. It was shaped like a K. It's gonna called the Subulanka or something like that. He was shipped off there, and he would be shipped from one cell, and it would put Alexander Dogan in another cell, and they would transfer him to another cell. They would tell him to take all his clothes off. They would tell him to do this and tell him to go to this cell. And he wrote this in his book. And he constantly said the feeling of not knowing what was going to be next, the feeling of not having this goal, not knowing what could be. That was what was driving him insane. That is what was driving him crazy, not knowing what was going to be next. So it can go either way. Not knowing what could be next and fully knowing what could be next could actually have the same kind of outcome. But it was really in this particular situation, it was that feeling of being locked in, being a prisoner, and that's exactly what you're doing when you put yourself in a situation where there can be no future. You're making yourself a prisoner to your own ideological jail. That's exactly what you're doing. But anyway, we're getting off topic. Epistemology. So how are we acquiring these facts? How are we acquiring knowledge? And Descartes had some interesting things to say about this. Now, before we start talking about really getting into Descartes, I have not read a whole lot of Descartes. I'm not a Descartes enthusiast. I'm not, the guy to be talking about him. But he did leave us with some interesting thoughts, with some interesting theories when he presented the mind-body problem, when he presented this idea of, what is this causality? What is going on here? Do we think? Do we do? Are these things connected in a way that we're going to discover that they weren't, which is probably the biggest problem with Cartesian duality. But Descartes he wanted to know about these same exact things we're talking about. He wanted to know, how do we acquire information? He wanted to understand the concept of a God, the concept of having, what is guiding our actions? What is guiding? Is it motivation? Is it this utopian vision? I mean, what is it? He was interested in all these things that we just talked about. And how he relates to Kant and Hume. Now, Hume and Descartes was more of the rationalist. Descartes was a mathematician, and he had a very huge contributions in many different fields. He was a very out projecting person. He was in very many different fields, but he was more of the mathematician. He was more of the rationalist. He wanted to be cold and calculated and understand something down to the conception of it, to have that proposition. That was the epitome of what a knowledge was for Descartes. It was something that he can hold on to, something that he could grab conceptually. And we're going to go into why that's a big problem. Why that's a huge problem. Because if everything just becomes conceptions, everything becomes this abstract thing that you have to rationalize, that immediately throws truth out the window. It throws the objective world out the window. And that is where Descartes and Hume kind of differed, because Hume, on this hand, he was grounded in the sense data. He was like, okay, if I can see it, if I can smell it, if I can touch it, if I can observe it, the empiricist, if I can view this, if I can observe this thing, then therefore I can know that this thing exists. And Descartes was kind of on the whole entire opposite side of the spectrum. He he believed that if something can be conceptualized, then therefore that is what I know to be true. Something that in a Kantian sense, before he was way before humankind, but it's kind of good. You can see how all these people were influencing each other in a Kantian sense, almost. If I can conceptualize this, if I can hold this to be true. And of course, Descartes had that very famous quote. I'm gonna ruin it. Cogito ergo sum. What does that mean? And this is kind of one of the main things I want to focus on. What does that mean? Cogito ergo sum. It's a Latin phrase. It means I think, therefore I am. Now he had two different modes of this entire philosophy when he was writing his meditations and his papers. He had these ideas of the external. So these are the material things that we can conceptualize, that we can participate in with our senses. And he had the cogito, so these things that we can conceptualize, the abstract. So it's kind of similar to when Hume came later on with his senses. He said that there's things that we can see, that we can touch, that we can feel, that we can grab onto objects, and there's these sensations, these ideas. He used the word ideas. There's ideas that we have inside of our mind that we can, how he later on formed his theories about causation, so on and so forth. So we can see like the reason why I'm bringing up all these different people, because I'm trying to show you how two people, how in a Jungian sense, one person they're kind of on the right path, and the other person, like he was kind of on the right path, and how they have these different theories, but they're kind of, adding toward each other in a harmonious way. But to get back to Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Something really wrong about that. And when he said this, he see the thing with Descartes is he is stuck in this conception. From what I read, and from what I've observed of him, and from what I read of critiques of other people critiquing him, he is stuck in this propositional tyranny. Hence the title of this episode. He's stuck in this way, in this mode of concept, in this mode of if I can think it in the abstract, then I can therefore know that to be true. So the truth is, the truth is kind of floating. The truth is floating in this abstract sense, and there's nothing underneath of it. There's nothing there's no flesh on it. And when Hume and Kant came later on, Kant was like, well, things are not just true in the abstract. These things are only true because we have these a priori interpretive frameworks that allow us to give rise to something being true. Truth is when reality and purpose combine. It's a reality plus a purpose, plus its telos in an Aristotelian way. There has to be that connect. There has to be that harmonious connection. Therefore, something can be true. Because when you just think about truth in the abstract, when you just think about something being true in the mind, if we're just having it in a proposition, what problem does that immediately arise? And then later on, we will see, and we are seeing that, especially in today, how an abstract truth is a recipe for disaster. Because when you abstract truth, when you abstract the mechanism you use to abstract concepts, the whole entire thing just collapses. That's how you devolve into these. You immediately fluctuate into a chaos when you don't have that grounding truth. Something has a reality, something has its purpose. These two things combine in a moralistic way, and then therefore that gives rise to something being true. The code calculated causation, this cognition, this computation, that type of model is top down. It is, if I can understand it in the abstract, I can then embody that truth and then act my truth out. That's where we get these abysmal things while I'm just living in my truth. Well, this is how I see it. Well, this is just my perspective. Well, this is how I viewed you as. And this is what I'm embodying that truth. When you live in that Cartesian think, therefore I am, you start in la la land. You say, well, I can see how that can be true. So let me take that abstract model. I'm going to embody that. And then therefore I'm going to act that out. It's a top-down enterprise. C.S. Lewis said that in his book, The Screwtape Letters. He said, you see the trick? Don't believe this because it's true, but for some other reason. You were in la la land. So we're going to talk about, and we're going to read some quotes from one of his Descartes' famous works. Give me a second to pull this up. This is from his Meditations. Uh-oh. Cut this part out. Yep, this is from his meditation. Meditation 5. Of the essence of material things, and again, of God that he exists. For example, in the case of every right-angled triangle, so we see just right off the bat, Kant had the same exact analogy with the triangle that Descartes originally conceptualized. So that's very cool that they both use that same analogy. For example, in the case of every right-angled triangle, although it does not so manifestly appear as at this base of opposite to the greatest angle, still, when this has once been apprehended, so that apprehended means I am now conceptualizing this triangle, we are just as uncertain of its truth as the truth of the other. And as regards God, if my mind were not preoccupied with prejudices, and if my thought did not find itself on all hands diverted by the continual pressure of sensible things, there would be nothing which I could know more immediately and more easily than him, with a capital H. Very interesting. For is there anything more manifest than that there is a God? That is to say, a supreme being to whose essence alone exists pertains. That's a very interesting excerpt, especially when he says, as regards to God, if my mind were not preoccupied with prejudices. So he's hinting at, almost when Kant came later with the moral presuppositions, he's hinting at this. There's something that stands between when something can be apprehended and then therefore believed or acted out. So Hume and Kant were dead on when they came to the realization that something exists in the abstract or something exists in the physical world. I therefore apprehend that in the Cartesian sense. In the Hume sense, that's the impression, so therefore I observe that in an empirical sense. And then Kant would say, similar to what Hume would say, that I am observing this thing in a moralistic and an a priori interpretive framework sort of way. So they're all dead along with this idea that there is some type of interpretive framework going on. And he says, if my mind had not been flooded with prejudices, so he's saying that there are things that are affecting my beliefs. And that's very, very true. You know, like we don't just believe everything. If we believe everything, we believe nothing. There are things that are clouding our beliefs. There are things that are clouding our perceptions. There are things that are clouding our morals. There are things that are clouding everything. So they're dead along with that. They're right with that. But the thing that what's going on here is that there's a big problem here. He's trying to rationalize the existence of God. He's trying to rationalize his understanding of understanding in a certain way. And there's a big problem with that, because you can't, everything that can be known or in the abstract, maybe in the physical world, I know this is a table, I know this is a computer, I know that I'm holding a marker. Things are not just calculated in that sort of empirical way. And he's rejecting the senses later than Hume. What Hume was just all on senses. Descartes is rejecting the senses. He's saying that, well, my senses are getting in the way of what I know to be true. And that is the postmodern problem. It literally is that. My senses are clouding my beliefs. Your senses, your outside surroundings, those are clouding what you hold to be true. Later, a few centuries later, well, you're only thinking that because you are clouded with prejudices. He's used that word, prejudices. You are only thinking that because you serve this particular group. You only believing this because you have some other interest. There are things that are clouding your perceptions. And this is the postmodern problem, and it's actually right. And that is why it stuck, and that's why it almost destroyed everything. That's why it's coming back and it's permeating culture today. Because there are things, so correct diagnosis, there are things that are clouding your beliefs. Right? Give this man a round of applause. Yes, we understand that. The postmodernists came by and they said, because you're only interested in your power, or you're only interested in your ideological obligations, wrong answer, wrong prescription. So these people, so Descartes was right in the certain sense that when I have something in the abstract, when I can think, when I can observe it, there is some type of interpretive framework going on. And that's important to this lecture series, because what the well-rounded fool does is he takes this process of viewing things and understanding things, or seeing someone's facial expression, or knowing this particular situation, and he knows that if I have to interpret this a certain way. So if I know how I interpret things, I therefore know how to pervert someone else's interpretation. And he can bend and he can twist his actions, and he can bend and twist the structures of truth. If I can just make truth, if I can profess that truth is some type of abstract thing that everyone can collectively participate in, then he can then do away with truth all to begin with. So this is why this problem of an abstract truth is plaguing, it is littering our society today, because it's making truth some type of abstract thing that you have to wrap your head around in some like academic scholarly sort of way. It's not like a grounded thing that everyone can understand, that everyone doesn't even have to understand. And maybe that's the answer. You don't have to understand the truth. And these people who profess, these postmodernists, post-structuralists that profess or who try to do away with truth, because they're trying to understand it. They're trying to literally understand it. They're trying to stand underneath of truth and say that's what it is. When truth itself is that which exists before our conceptualizations. So what Descartes is missing here is that the truth already existed before you whipped your pen out, bro. It already existed. You don't need to get in like this spot where you need to sit here and mentally masturbate your prefrontal cortex to the point where nothing exists. You don't need to do that. The truth already exists. The truth is here. It's there. You step into it. You don't sit there and let it, and you don't have to be a magnet and attract it to you. You don't have to understand it. And what is true exists despite our understandings. So this is the problem that we're facing right now. If I can get to this other quote. And this one was really interesting. Nor does the objection hold good that possibly the idea of a triangle has reached my mind through the medium of my senses, since I have sometimes seen bodies triangular in shape, because I can form in my mind an infinitude of other figures regarding which we cannot have the least conception of their having been objects of sense. And I can nevertheless demonstrate various properties pertaining to their nature as well as that of the triangle, and these must certainly all be true, since I can conceive them clearly. So he's saying that these are true because I can conceive it. And we're facing that problem again. Something is true because I can wrap my head around it. That's wrong. Truth exists before you wrap your head around it. Hence, there are something and not pure negation. For it is perfectly clear that all is true is something. And I have already fully demonstrated that all that I know is clearly true. And even although I had not demonstrated this, the nature of my mind is such that I cannot prevent myself from holding them to be true, so long as I can conceive them clearly. So wrong. And I recollect that even when I was still strongly attached to the objects of sense in a union introverted type of way, I counted as the most certain those truths which I can conceive clearly as regards figures, numbers, and other matters which pertain to arithmetic and geometry, and in general to pure and abstract mathematics. So it sounds like he's trying to jam-pack the idea of truth in sort of like this arithmetic, scientific, abstract sort of way. He said that I know this to be true because I can conceive it, because I can think about it. That cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore that is. And there's a problem there, because even the statement, I think, therefore I am, why do you value what you say? Why do your words somehow translate into some sort of truth? Why are you valuing what you say? Why are you valuing what you are? Why are you valuing the fact that you wrote those words down on a piece of paper and that you put, like, why do you care about that? Why do you care about that? It's not that you can just understand something because you can think about it. And it's damn sure not true that it's because you can think about it and that means it's true. When you abstract the truth, everything falls apart. And I think it's now a good time to get to the whiteboard and talk about this Cartesian duality and how this idea of multiple truths and multiple realities and how that relates to epistemology with Rebecca, how this all ties together, how we can have a deeper understanding of what it means to know, what it means something to be true. So when we have right here, this is the Cartesian, this dualism. This is a theory that he developed when he was trying to investigate the mind-body problem. Well, we have this mind. I have my mind, which is this would be the cogito. Sorry, I have atrocious handwriting. This would be the cognition. That's where we actually get the word cognition. That actually means to acquire that information. That's where we get that word. This is what I can know to be true in the abstract. So this exists in an entity all by itself. In the body, this would be the physical. This would be the, I'm going to spell that wrong. It's what is exuded out inside of the actual world. This would be the materialism. This would be objects. My body, my organs. Now, this is the model that, and these are abstract concepts. Mathematics, etc., logic or logica, however you want to say it. This is the model that we're operating in right now. And the problem with this theory is that these two things are distinct entities. In what the fundamental thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, these people, when they conceptualized this mind-body problem, well, it really wasn't an articulated mind-body problem. But there really is no difference between this and the concept of truth and purpose. I'm going to demonstrate that right now, because this is the mind. So the truth has to exist. The truth has to be over here. The truth has to be simultaneously in this department as well. The truth has to be above this. Truth has to be above and it has to be below this model of this Cartesian dualistic model. Because when you have the truth in just the abstract, So the abstract would be the mind. The mind is up here. Well, I think that I think, therefore I am, or I think, well, I'm seeing this object, I'm seeing this thing, I'm thinking about, I have this feeling, my feelings. If the truth is just up here, and then I should have had the body down here, my bad. But if the truth only just exists up here in the abstract, in the mind, then that immediately fluctuates into an infinite amount of identities. Well, what makes that person's truth any more real than this person's truth? What makes my feelings any more real, any more embodied than somebody else's? Truth cannot be collective. Truth has to be both. Truth cannot just exist in one department. It can't just be in the mind, and it can't just be in the body. I'm missing a limb, or I just seen someone die. These things are existing in the actual world. It can't just be in one, and it can't just be in the mind. They have to be both. And this is why the Cartesian dualistic model does not work, because it separates truth from purpose. That which separates truth from purpose, by definition, is falsehood. It is deception. That could be a definitional term. Deception is that which detaches truth from purpose. And this is the postmodern dilemma. This is what's going on in blue-haired leftist head when they don't understand something. Well, you're getting confused. Well, what is happening in your mind? It's not reality. And what is happening in reality is not just happening in your mind. These two things are together. The Cartesian dualistic model separates these two things, and they make them completely distinct. That's how you can come to ridiculous conclusions. Well, I was born in the wrong body. Or my body doesn't match my mind. Who is I? That I presupposes something already being there, something deeper. If your I only exists up in the mind, it doesn't mean anything. It has to mean something that contributes both. It has to mean something that adds both of these together. If your I only exists in the mind, it makes it no more deeper. It makes it no more real than if it just existed over here. And when you have a model that separates these two modes, everything collapses, because there is no truth that combines the truth with the purpose. And that's what we're facing right now. So in closing, what does all this mean? What's the significance of this? If we don't have a solid grasp of how we interpret or how we acquire this information, how we understand the truth and how it relates to not just the mind in an abstract Cartesian way, but how it grips, how it needs to have that gripping, that flesh on it in a Kantian a priori sort of way, in the what is grounded. If we don't have that connection that instantaneously opens the door for that deception, that which robs the truth from its purpose, from its initial point of view, from its initial meaning. So the Cartesian model is what's permeating our culture today, because we are separating the truth from the purpose. And when you separate truth from purpose, they both eliminate, they both vanish. And that's what happened in the Soviet Union. That's what happened in Nazi Germany. That's what happens when these political ideologies parasitize our very structure for interpreting the world as it is. Because it fractures off into combinatorial explosion. And I apologize, we didn't get to Rebecca, but we'll save that for the next episode. So the well-rounded fool separates the truth from the purpose. The well-rounded fool can hold this to be true and do another thing. The well-rounded, the deceiver, the person who lies, a person who deceives people, they can think one thing and do another and see no contradiction there. So contra, see no difference from what they conceive to what they do, if these are two completely distinct entities. I was just thinking that this is where we get these crazy things of these non-predatory you know what. While I'm just thinking about it, I'm not going to act on it. These two things are connected. They don't exist in things in and of themselves. When you abstract, you leave the door open to deception. When you abstract things that are one, you immediately deceive that structure. And that is what the well-rounded fool does. The well-rounded fool takes structures, abstracts them, to dissect them for its own gain. So I think that was good. It's a good place to stop. For the next episode, we're going to go further into epistemology. We're going to discuss how the Cartesian model then went through Hume and Kant, and how this problem of abstract truth devolved into a no truth, into a postmodern no grand narrative, and how Nietzsche was a major contributor to that movement. So I thank you guys for watching this, and this will probably be the last one because the holidays are coming up. So wish you guys a Merry Christmas and have a happy holidays and a happy New Year, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for your time.